Hey everybody, Spider here, coming soon podcast, San Antonio, Texas, of course, joined by my guest Heidi Levitt. How are you doing this evening?
Good. Thank you for calling.
No. Thank you for waiting. I thought we had a 2 hour difference, but you're actually way in the future. You're actually 3 hours ahead. So thank you for
Yeah.
your time. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, of course, we are going to jump into this project or this film that you've actually been promoting a lot, and obviously, it does hit home for one reason. But I wanted to go backtrack a little bit and talk about some of these past films that we've a lot of us have enjoyed throughout the years.
Okay.
So
Sure.
when it comes to your humble beginnings, I mean, of course, I think as far as IMDb, I had you credited back in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And is that where everything started for you, or when did a film enter your life? Let me ask you that.
So I went to college in New York City at Barnard College, and I was involved in the theater. And it was really a little bit like earlier than 1988, actually. I'm wondering what credit you're referring to. But when I graduated college, I worked first for CBS News, and I really thought of myself wanting to be like a producer on 60 Minutes. And I worked on the elections, and I was an analyst for the New York Times and CBS on the polls, and that was really the height of polling. It's interesting in a different political time now. Anyways, I finished that job at the election unit at CBS, and in order to really move forwards, you had to go to a smaller town to be a producer. Like, it wasn't like easy to just segue in New York. And I'm Canadian, and I had considered going back to Canada, but I couldn't get my foot in the door. And I was like, wait a minute, I just worked for Dan Rather. Don't you care? And they're like, send me your CV. At that same time, there was a lot of independent film happening in New York City. So films like Jim Jarmusch's Stranger Than Paradise, the Coen brothers' Blood Simple, and Susan Seidelman's film Desperately Seeking Susan, which I think just had its like 40th anniversary or something. Those were all coming out. And I had worked when I was in college. I was a poli-sci, serious kind of person, but I love the theater. And I had worked at a really great off-Broadway theater. And when I went to see Desperately Seeking Susan, which was really on an early date with my husband, Charlie, I was like, I recognized every actor in that movie from off-Broadway. And I thought, wow. Then I read an article in the New York Times. There used to be a column called At the Movies by Janet Maslin, and she would just profile different things every week. And there was a profile about the casting directors of Desperately Seeking Susan. Well, at that point, I read that profile and I was like, I knew who all these actors were, and it sort of started to come together that there was this job in casting. And I had read another article about a famous casting director. And it's funny because I was just watching, because Diane Keaton passed, I was watching more Diane Keaton movies. And I was watching actually Annie Hall, then Manhattan today. And basically, Juliet Taylor, who was this brilliant casting director, she cast all of those movies. And I had read an article about her. And then I was really, there's a job in this. And I had no idea. I grew up in Montreal. I didn't know anybody in the entertainment business, and I didn't know that there was a job in casting. But those two pieces came together, and I thought, oh, and they mentioned in this article in the New York Times about these casting directors working at the Ensemble Studio Theater in New York. And I'm like, okay. So I wrote my little letter and I marched down to the Ensemble Studio Theater and I gave my letter to the casting directors, Risa Brayman and Billy Hopkins. And they suddenly were the it casting directors in New York City because the other person that I mentioned, Juliet Taylor, was going to take a hiatus. Her daughter was maybe in high school, and she started giving jobs referring to them because she knew their work. They had worked in the theater. And they had so many jobs that they didn't quite know how to juggle. So I very quickly moved from, intern to assistant to associate working there. And I started to cast movies. So one of the first things that I did was a movie for a director named Alan Parker called Angel Heart. It was like a detective story with Mickey Rourke. and Lisa Bonet was her first starring role in a movie. And there was a lot of details that Alan Parker wanted, and he cared desperately about every face in the movie. And I was, 24, like, I'll do whatever they asked,
Yeah.
like, so he wanted to find a real jazz musician to play this one part. And I didn't know that much about jazz, but I was like digging in. And this is before the internet. This is me
Oh yeah.
going through Yellow Pages, going to, every jazz bar in New York City, calling the Newport Jazz Festival. And this is something they don't do in casting anymore because of the internet, which is good and bad. I was sent all over the country
Yeah.
scouting. And I found Brownie McGee, who was at that time a blues guitar player in San Francisco. But Alan Parker loved that I was so, you know, I guess tenacious.
Yeah.
And so then he said, well, would you come to New Orleans and cast all these small parts? And and I'm like, sure. So I went there and I had a camera and an old video camera and a Polaroid, and I would go into bars and I would take pictures and pull them out and, cast these really complicated sequences. And that's when I realized I had never made a film and I had never studied film. And I was he was a quite well-known director. And I applied to the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, which at that time was probably the least expensive graduate school that I had known somebody who'd gone there for film school. It had been formed by LBJ, and it was actually somewhat supposed to be this great academy of film, like in Europe, the great art academies. It was subsidized, the early classes, by the government. When I applied, it was not as subsidized, but it was still less expensive than many of the others. And you could go for a year or 2 years. It wasn't like you had to pay. I mean, now I'm a professor there and I feel so indebted to the place, but also like, wow, now it's like a business and these kids are coming in and they're paying $65,000 a year to go to graduate school. And it's part of our crisis. But it was a wonderful way to find myself in Los Angeles. And my husband was a graphic designer and he had never studied graphic design. So he went to art school and I went to film school. And also Oliver Stone, who I was at the last job that I did before I moved, was as an assistant on Wall Street because Oliver was one of our clients. And Oliver had then moved to LA. And for like 10 years, really, I was on an Oliver Stone movie every year. And it became something that was like an incredible amount of research work and opportunity because I did these enormous political stories and I had studied poli-sci. I told you I wanted to be a producer at 60 Minutes, and JFK was, there was probably 120 roles in JFK and it was huge. It was in New Orleans again. So I worked with the other casting directors that I became a partner, and I worked with Oliver until Nixon when
Yeah.
I had my daughter, and I've subsequently helped him on his documentaries. But yeah, so that was sort of my beginning, and being a casting director really gave me so much more training than I had realized until I made this movie that I made. Because I was in the room with amazing directors, getting their perspective and understanding that. And I actually had a lot more skill set than I even realized.
Oh yeah. I mean, could you talk about just kind of like moving up quick enough or fast enough? Excuse me. But a lot of it's like on the job training. So you were actually learning firsthand from actual people that were there. So I mean, let me ask you this, and I mean, of course, schooling is great, and I'm all for it. When it comes to those that can actually attend. I mean, like you mentioned, now compared to back
Yeah.
then, it wasn't as expensive, but a lot of it, like, I mean, I do jump on films and I love doing a lot of behind the scenes uh, activity work. I mean, BTS, whatever the case, because I absorb. I'm more like a hands on kind of guy. So it's like I learn more from watching people than from
Mhm.
somebody trying to teach me. I mean, it's just I'm not really great with books. I mean, when it comes to learning, but yeah, I mean, the fact that you were actually able to kind of get your feet wet and then go to school. I mean, I'm sure I don't want to say made it easier, but I mean, you kind of already knew firsthand, like, okay, well, you know what,
I knew firsthand, but the going to school is also, I mean, filmmaking is collaboration. It doesn't happen by one person. And going to school the way that they set it up at AFI it's a conservatory. So it was really about hands-on learning. You were making a film, you were working with different crews, you were out there doing it yourself. And I feel like it was very valuable as a way of who is in your class, how to learn to work together. And they almost set it up like mini studios. I mean, I feel, you know, when you're a filmmaker or an actor or anybody, the sum of your parts is what it's all about. It's not just like learning the trade. I feel like you're a better actor if you're more well-read and you're more experienced in the world. And the same thing with filmmaking. It's like, you know, the Werner Herzog version of like film school is different, right, than what other directors might have gone through, but there's something valuable about, I always think that school is it's incredibly valuable to just take that moment to stop, to put it all together and to be in that fantasy world where you can make anything. I tell my students when I teach directors what it is about casting. I'm like, here you can experiment and do it all. Like, the fact that you have to cast a certain person for a box office potential, it's not about that. You got to make a great movie. And even I mean, I have calls like this all the time as a casting director, like today, you know, what was considered a movie star today is different from the 1990s, where there was a foreign sales that was dominating in a different way. Now you have streamers, and somebody might be famous on a streamer, but they're not in the same boat as a George Clooney, Brad Pitt. And today we have so few distributors for theatrical that it really boils down to how good is your movie? Because I can tell you movies I did with huge movie stars in them and they didn't do as well. Because ultimately, if the movie it's not great, like
right,
it's not being saved. Martin Scorsese said 90% of, making a movie is casting. And I do believe that casting is a huge part because if you don't believe the person telling the story, it doesn't work as well. Like you're not invested in the story. But ultimately, it has to be a 360. It's not, you can have a fantastic actor, but it doesn't save a bad movie
right,
necessarily all the way. So even in making a documentary, like I feel I didn't see my husband who'd never acted, never been a person I imagined in front of a camera, becoming sort of the engaging lead that understood the camera and understood how to sort of be. And yet that was my lucky stars that he was so warm on camera. And had it not been like that, I don't know if the movie would have been as strong. So I think it's really important. But in a documentary, sometimes how I chose some of the other people to be in the documentary had to do with casting.
no, and I gotta ask because when you said, when you started, I mean, when it came to casting, you were actually traveling, you were actually looking for these people. I don't want to say that it's easier now for people to cast, especially with the internet, because of course, like this, we can just interact right quick. But did it make it a little bit more? Not, I don't want to say personal, but did it make it a little bit more comfortable? You actually looking for people and finding them and being okay. You know what? That's the person I need.
Oh, 110%. In fact, I'm actually considering writing a book about this because I
Right.
feel like this changes everything is COVID. Because the minute that that happened, right, we can all be remotely. I'm here in Vermont. I cast a movie for Rodrigo Garcia from this place. I didn't meet anybody. I met them on Zoom. And I I totally don't like this process. I meet you and I can see you on Zoom and we're interacting, but when we're auditioning in the room and I'm reading with you often, I have a whole other feeling as to what's going on. And I really believe that we're missing part of the process and it's going to take a while to understand, like, are the movies that are being made now that are not being done in the room any different quality than the way that it used to be? I believe in process, you know? To me, I'm skipping part of the process, and I don't like that. In fact, I'm thinking about going back to do more theater again because that is live. And I really miss meeting people. You know, people would call and they would come in for a general interview. I can tell you so many people that I met that way that I kind of knew immediately. And I don't, it's different when you're doing it on camera and Zoom. And of course it's great for being, you're in Texas, I'm in Vermont, and how would we meet together? So it has amazing abilities to connect people, but I think from a creative point of view, a lot of casting directors and directors, they'll talk about the chemistry read. So that's another thing, like, do they have chemistry? How do you find that chemistry out on Zoom?
Right.
And I don't
No,
really think you do. And I'm not, for me, chemistry is a whole separate thing. I think a director needs to fall in love with each of the actors. And if he believes or she believes in them, they will come together and it will work. It's not such a magic test. A good actor is a good actor. They know how to work with other actors.
no, no, definitely. You see, and I think it's important because even like you mentioned now, I mean, when like right now we're talking. I mean, we can be great, we can be, in sync and chemistry's there, and then we go meet somewhere at the airport. And I think body language in general has a lot to do with it because now you get to actually see me interact. I mean, it's not just from the chest up, it's just going to be like my whole
Right,
body language. I mean, and
right.
it does make a difference. I mean, you brought up COVID, and for me, I always tell people because like when COVID happened or what's going on when it first started, I was delivering furniture. I was a contract delivery driver for Big Lots for years, and I, started wearing a mask. So it's like I started going to all these new stores picking up furniture, and like everybody I met, I had a mask on. And so like after COVID was done, and I started going to these stores without a mask and seeing everybody without a mask, I was like, man, I was way off. In my head, I had them pictured; they looked completely different, and it was only this
Right.
that was covered. But,
Hmm.
but it not to say it made a difference, but I mean, it kinda like I was just like, "Wow," like, you know what? There's more to it than just, voice, than just this, because I mean, after you cast somebody, then you can go to this, if you've
Hmm.
actually met the actor, the actress, you can actually, okay, you know what? Perfect body language is there, everything was there, and now you can go to this and actually just keep working on stuff. You can do readings, you can do, but yeah, I mean, I think it is important for somebody to actually be there when they're actually casting actors. I mean, unless you've already worked with them and you can just kind of bring them back, and it's just chemistry's
Yeah.
already there, so makes sense. But yeah, you did mention. I mean, you are from. I mean, you were born in Canada, correct?
I'm Canadian.
And what was it that brought you to the U.S.?
Well, I was born 2.5 hours north of here. So um it was a different political time. My mother was American, so I already knew, and I wanted to go to college in the United States because of, I really wanted a liberal arts education, and it was a very different kind of education in Canada. Plus, I'm from Quebec, and I grew up in the height of separatism, something that I was talking about today to a younger producer from Montreal, that people don't understand what happened in the 70s in Montreal. We were part of the Quiet Revolution. So the city, the majority, the province is French. I am bilingual, but I am not a native francophone. I grew up in an English speaking household. And sort of like in Ireland, there was a revolution more going on between Northern Ireland. This was what we call the Quiet Revolution because the French Catholic Church controlled the majority of the people, but a lot of the wealth was concentrated in a more white Anglo-Saxon Protestant community. And the church, in some ways, had something to do with not allowing that economic freedom to happen to the French Canadian. They weren't encouraged in the same way educationally and with different opportunities. And there was a very interesting, smart French separatist premier named René Lévesque, and he was at the forefront of saying no. Quebec is the largest, I think maybe at that time it was the most populated province, and could it survive on its own? And they enforced the language bill. So French became the only official language.
Wow.
And in becoming the only official language, because we have a unique thing that in nowhere else in North America. If you went into Montreal, even to this day, there was the Protestant school board and the Catholic school board. The Protestant school board was English and the Catholic was French. Plus, I went to a Jewish school. It was supported by the government. So it wasn't like going to a different kind of parochial school. I mean, it was not as like a private school is expensive. And then there's Muslim schools. I mean, it's a very unique place where things weren't separated. Now it's becoming much more like they're trying to make it, I think, just one school board. And the only way that you can send your child to a public English language school is if you were educated in a public English language school. So in some levels, there's something really kind of fascist about this, like dictating where your kid can go to school, where there's a language police. They can come into your business and say you're not speaking French. I
Wow.
mean, this, but what happened in doing all of this and in legislating the language is that the city became kind of multicultural in a good way, in that it was the French sort of rose up in a sense of having more power and more place in government. And now it's such a melange of people. It's almost like, in so much of America, like we should be speaking Spanish and speaking English. And now when I go back, like I remember getting hired. I started getting hired because I was a tax deduction as a Canadian. There's a Canadian government that funds the film industry. So as a Canadian, I qualified to get a tax deduction if they hired me as the casting director. And of course, they were interested because I had more of an ear to Hollywood than somebody who was based in Montreal. But what I loved about it was sort of like here I was meeting and working with French speaking people, and I had been segregated as a kid. I lived in an English neighborhood. That neighborhood is no longer like that. It's majority French,
Right.
but it is now acceptable going back to French and English. And the city is a very different cultural place. So, anyways, because of all of the separatism, in a way, it allowed me to leave, because if I went to university at McGill, it would have been practically free. And my father's like, why am I going to pay for you to go to the United States? But because of separatism, if you were an Anglo, it was less likely to get hired for jobs at the early stages of it, right? Because there was this reverse
Right.
um, kind of, not racism, I don't know what you would say, but there's an understanding, like if you're English and if you're French, and they were trying to sort of promote more of the French than the English.
No, no, for sure. And I mean, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, for like here, I mean, I'm bilingual. I mean, I speak Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish. That was my first language. I can read and write in Spanish. My older siblings can't, and it's just so happened. Like for me, the only reason I kept with it was because like I didn't go to pre-K. I went to first grade. So pre-K, I was with mom watching TV soap operas in Spanish. So I picked it up a lot faster. So I spent a lot of time with her. But I mean, it's in the early '80s. I mean, for myself, it was I don't want to say uncommon, because I mean, of course, there's a lot of bilingual people here. But I mean, for a lot of the schools that I went to, I mean, there was a lot of kids that didn't speak Spanish.
Yeah,
So it was, and it's not to say that they were forced, but a lot of the
yeah,
mentality for a lot of parents back then was like, "Hey, we're in America. Like, you're gonna speak English. That's
exactly.
it."
Yeah, that's one of my pet projects that I really want to do is a project called Exiles on Main Street. And it's basically stories about what does it mean to be an American. And the idea is that when you look at Canada, they call it it's a mosaic. And the government was supporting each individual. Like I said, I went to a Jewish school supported by the government. The government supports this mosaic. In America, we're told everyone's an American, you're American first. But is that really the case? And is that really true? And who are we? And Exiles on Main Street is a series of 1 hour dramas based on short stories by well known authors that are about identity. And I wanted to do it because I didn't want to do just here's the Mexican story of somebody trying to cross the border, or here's, you know, you would see a Middle Eastern story, and it's all just stereotypical. And the point is that it shouldn't be, because it really isn't. And I found all these amazing authors, and I've put together a collection of stories that I hope to do. And about that, because I feel like we really need to understand who we are. And even if you look at Hollywood and who's won the Oscar, if you look back in the last, 10 years to 15 years, many of the directors that have won the Best Picture are immigrant directors, or are directors from outside
Oh
of
yeah.
America. And it's really interesting when you look at the film industry was started by Samuel Goldwyn and who's the other one I'm thinking about from 20th Century Fox. They were Polish, German, Russian refugees who'd come over. And that is our life here in America. We are everything.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always tell people because, like, even like being considered Mexican, I mean, it's not an ethnicity, it's a country, and
Exactly.
I tell people like my great grandma on my mom's side, like she was African American. She lived in Mexico. She was born in Mexico, therefore she was Mexican. But it's like when
Right.
it came to my grandma on my mom's side, I mean, it's just part of
Yeah.
who I am. But yeah, I mean, growing up here, I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, it's just for myself. I mean, there's a lot of reverse racism too that I want to. I'm kind of glad. No, I don't think I've ever heard anybody else say it, call it that, because I call it a lot of. I call it like I see it, and a lot of it was reversed, because it's like now me going to Mexico, a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, you're an American. You're
Yeah.
Chicano." They used to call me a Chicano, like in the '90s. When I was go to work,
Right.
and everybody that was
Yeah.
from Mexico was like, "Oh, you're Chicano, man. You're not Mexican." And they would say it like it was a bad thing, and I'm like, "Well, damn, like I'm bilingual. I
Yeah.
should speak to everybody,
But
but yeah,
America
that'd
is
be
like this shiny, cool, like even from a Canadian, like, from 2 hours, you know, north of the border, I saw more opportunity.
yeah,
You know, I now really appreciate Canada and, socialized medicine and even caring for my parents. Like I can do that somewhat more easily because there's a system in place there,
nice.
which doesn't exist here in the same way. But it's a different, the differences are subtle, but they're there. And I think I was influenced like everybody, like probably you've had friends in Mexico interested and they come to America because you see it as like it's the land of opportunity. It's, look at the advertising on television, look at what we see, what is Hollywood, projecting to us. And it's projecting dreams here
Yeah.
that anything is possible. And in a different society where, like in Canada, we are more taken care of, it is a more socialized country in many ways, it's a bit more comfortable. So there isn't that same grit to people in the same way.
No, and I was going to say too, because I mean, you keep mentioning the health care system. I mean, when it comes to, I mean, here in the U.S., I mean, of course, everything costs an arm and a leg. I mean, even just trying to get care. I mean, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, drugs, a lot of them are expensive. It's almost
Mhm.
like they're making it harder for you to want to stay alive because you can't afford it. So it's just, but in Canada, so I mean, is that something that the government helps out with?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, each province is different, but yeah, it's completely free. It can be. Now there's a private system also, When I grew up, there was nothing private. Now there's some private because the system has become so stressed out that it's hard to get a doctor. So now some of the times you're seeing people, there's a new opening in private medicine, but it didn't exist when I was younger because it could sustain itself. But like everything, it's maxed out now and they need to revise it. But if you're very sick, there's going to be a place that's going to take you and it's going to be okay. It's just for people who are not that sick, that you're just trying to like get a hernia operation, they're
Yeah.
going to tell you have to wait for 2 years or something
Yeah.
crazy. Whereas you can buy that in the United States. Like, no, you
Right.
need it done, we can find you someone. So
No, yeah.
it's different.
You
But
see, and I was gonna say too, I mean, when it comes to a lot of the like my mom, like growing up, she used to her and my aunts, like they used to make road trips to Mexico for healthcare, like to
yeah,
get
people in LA go to there all the time for their dental care because it's cheaper, or
yeah.
people who would buy birth control pills because it was cheaper. I mean, it's yeah, look, that's we can go on for an hour and a half
Oh
about
yeah,
like
for
what's
sure.
wrong with the country. Yeah, this and I would say in regards to Walk With Me, like I am advocating now more for care and caregiving because we're at a point of crisis. We have a population that is only, aging, and dementia is a growing exponential number for people. Like there might be 55 million people around the world now, but in 10 years that's going to be exponentially huger. And
Yeah.
how do we live with that when we don't have a cure? And therefore, we need to learn, first of all, what it is and how do we care for one another and not just siphon people off into a memory care facility, but create structures and possibilities so people can have more care for a longer time. So there is a bill that was reintroduced into Congress by Representative Linda Sanchez from Whittier, California, called the Credit for Caring Act. It's a $5,000 tax deduction, almost like a child care tax deduction, which should be like a no-brainer, low-hanging fruit. It's completely bipartisan. We are all going to be caretakers, or we're going to need a caretaker. This is everyone. This does not even have to do with having dementia or not. And I feel that our story and seeing it understands and highlights how hard this is, and that the country is at a breaking point, and we need to acknowledge that caretakers are us and that we all need help.
No, not true. I mean, dementia, that's something that my mother suffered from the last year for before she passed away. Unfortunately, she did pass last year in August, and before that, I mean, we struggled. I mean, we had her here at home because I didn't want to put her anywhere, and even then,
Mm,
it was hard because I had to be here around her 24/7 to where like if I wasn't here, my girlfriend had to be here, and it like we had to like
mm,
rotate shifts just to kind of and towards the end, like the last 4 months that she was with us, I mean, her health declined. Where we had to put her in a hospice. We had to put her in
hmm
a care just so that she could get that 24/7 care because
Yeah.
it was impossible. I mean, it was like I tried, like
Yeah, we
you
all
know,
try, but we don't have public policy starting soon enough to talk about how do we deal with this. And we have a society that's so obsessed with youth and just like looking our best and living our best, which we all should do. But
yeah.
the fact is that we all have an expiry date and it's going to happen. And also the brain health has to be looked at in the same way that we look at the rest of our body. And because we don't know how to deal with this disease in particular, is like the first person diagnosed was 53 when they identified Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia. And she said, I fear I have lost myself. And I think because it's such a scary thing, it's not like, I have breast cancer and I might lose my breast, and that's horrible. But it's like losing your mind. Is it your soul? Is it your personality? Is it who you are? And if we're not able to face and talk about our brain is changing, the person is changing, how do we best support or incorporate those changes? Like they're not the same, but that's okay. They're evolving and we can't fix it right now. So how do we live with it? How do we care for it? And so because people are so afraid to look at that, because they look at that and they're like, oh my God, then what if this happened to me? Like it's very scary.
Oh yeah, yeah. It,
And I wanted to talk to people about like, yeah, however scary it is, we need to figure out a better way to live through this right now while we don't have any real cures.
no, I mean true, because even now, I mean, me and my girlfriend, I mean, we don't joke about it, but I mean, we kind of like every once in a while we're like, hey, well, you need to stay healthy because something happens to me, you got to take care of me, kind of thing. And it's just like
Right.
one of those things where it's like, yeah, you got to start preparing because we all hope and wish that our kids will watch us till till forever, right? But I mean, like you said, everybody's out there trying to do their best. Everybody's got a job, got a career, got
Mhm.
something going on. So it's just hard for my I mean, I would feel bad if I would have to ask my children to put their life on hold. It's just like one of those things. Like I mean, but what do you do? So there's got to be ways to
Right.
work
We need to
that.
build a new structure. And I think it starts first with identifying that there's some things that we can't fix right now, but we could make a better society that is more inclusive and accepting. Like, for example, today I was on the phone with this community, which is I forget what they call them. It's like a life community, right? 55 plus or 60 something plus,
Right.
where people buy into a community and it provides health care for when you get ill and through the end of your life. So this community that I was interested in is in Vermont and it's nonprofit. And that was the other thing I was interested in because so much is about making money off of me. And at least like this community is about that. So I said to the woman, I said, I looked at this place a long time ago and I think we were too young. We were not yet 60, and now I'm in my 60s now. And, my husband has a diagnosis. And I remembered that maybe he couldn't come to your community because of that. And she said, yeah. I said, I was just checking to see if you still had the same policy. And she said, yes, you could come to the community, but he can't. And I said, but you have memory care there. You have everything. And she says, yes, but the bylaws of the community were, and it was partly about money, right? Because it costs a lot of money to have care for a person of dementia. So they'll give you a medical exam and you have to show like that you're healthy and that they sort of figure out like an insurance calculation, like, okay, maybe for 2 years they're okay and then it's all right. But I was like, wow, I said, this is a place like I would have imagined that maybe could have worked for us. Like there was a lot, he's still very much vital. He's very much aware. Yes, he needs assistance in almost everything, but he's there
Yeah.
and he knows it. And I think that example of like, yeah, well, sorry, it just won't work out here is wrong, is what I'm fighting against because I would like communities to be more eh, diverse in that way, accepting. It's like disabled people. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't. You're wheelchair bound, so you can't move into this building because there's only stairs." We have laws for that,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
But we don't have laws for a person who's still very vital, who still might live another 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
We don't have protection. And that's really a huge issue. Because if we don't look at others in that way, what's going to happen? Like we might find ourselves in the same shoes. So how do you justify that,
Yeah, I mean, and that's true because even like the other day, like where I work at, we have a ramp accessibility. It's on the back end of the building. It's not in the front. We have like three entrances, like the two side in the front, and then one in the back. But a lot of customers that come through, they always go to the front because that's the front of the building. So they're always having to like use crutches, have assistance for people to help them up the stairs. And like every time, it's always never fails. Like I always see them when they're already halfway up, and I'm like, man, there's a ramp in the back. I apologize. And but it's one of those things that I brought up to my boss, and I'm like, hey, we need to put ramps up front too. I said because not everybody sees the back entrance because nobody
Mhm.
drives around the building. I said, and like everybody that's gone through there, I feel bad because it's just like, but. But my point being, like, yeah, I mean, we bend for a lot of other things, but why not this? Like you said, I mean, how can you say, okay, well, you have signs of Alzheimer's, but who am I to say, you know what, you only have like, so much time.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
exactly.
can have 5, 10 years, you can outlive that person saying you can't, and it's like, so yeah, I mean, that's true. I don't know why there aren't rules for that, or there's, for safety, for caring, for help.
Mhm. We're trying to
No,
change
yeah,
that
and also,
conversation, and that's why I'm going to be advocating and going to Washington, D.C., and sharing this with Congress so that we can at least start. It's a very small start by getting a Credit for Caring Act, which is nothing on one level, but it's a beginning,
yeah,
and it's a beginning to mark change. And for people to start, I didn't call myself a caregiver. I don't know when you were caring with your mom, if you did either. I
no.
don't think about myself that way. I'm his wife. Of
Yeah,
course I'm
I
gonna,
was my mom's son, right? That was my mom, so it's like,
but I feel like when we start mentioning it, then it start becomes real. And there's like, if you read statistics, they'll say there's $1 trillion economy of unpaid care. Now we don't expect to, it's not about the being paid, but if I can't be there, I have to pay somebody,
yeah.
right? And I can't be there 24/7 anymore, probably. I'm wearing out, right? I need to have care. And
No,
who's
yeah.
going to pay for that? And even if you go on Medicaid and you can get some care, but it varies state by state, and it just should be part of the public dialogue and a way that we can talk about it and address it and have some safety lanes for us. Just the
Oh,
same way that, we should have safety lanes by everybody having health insurance.
no, I mean, that's true. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, the fact that this film that obviously, I mean, you had worked on. Now, you had mentioned you had never done a film, years of being a casting director, but I mean, when it comes to, and I say this flyer, but I mean, of course, it was for one of the film festivals, but so everybody can
Hmm.
see what we're talking about. Walk with me. I mean, this obviously hit home. This was a story that, it's your story, among others that are out there going through the same thing. But I mean, this is you guys being at the forefront and actually letting people know what's going on and how you're dealing with the issue of, in front of us, because it is a very big issue.
Yes, thank you.
Now,
So
so
we are going to start playing the film theatrically. We're opening in Los Angeles October 30th at the Lemley Theater. We're going to be playing in New York. I'm qualifying for Academy Awards, and my plan is in the new year. I've gotten a lot of interest from different organizations and groups that want to see the film. They've seen it at a festival or heard about it. And we will be playing the film theatrically. So if there's people who are interested in groups that want to get together, we are going to be working with a theatrical distributor, and they can email walkwithme dot post. Wait, I have to. Now
I
I'm
can put that
forgetting.
on the
Walkwithmepost at gmail.com. Walkwithmepost at gmail.com. And we can then start arranging screenings. And the plan is to go online in later in the year in 2026. First, we're playing for impact because I feel like being in a community and seeing it in community really gets people a chance to really have a dialogue about it. And of course, I want to make it accessible for everyone, so we want it to be online. And we're talking to a couple of different streaming opportunities, but we're starting with a theatrical play. And a lot of organizations, be there, churches and synagogues and mosques and different people like that. And then there's the caregiving organizations and all the Alzheimer's organizations in every state who could bring people together for events.
Yeah.
And that's where, and I think that we're going to find some success. And I found it by just playing randomly in, different festivals across the country, that this spoke to many people. And I think that it will speak to many more. So if I can start a groundswell and a movement for this, then it will sort of have its bigger impact, which is to get real public policy change and dialogue. There's not been a cure. There's now new treatments that they're talking about for early onset Alzheimer's, but they're still way behind. We're where cancer was in the 1980s. And that's partly because of the stigma around this kind of disease. People were afraid to really look at it. And in the 1980s, they were putting more money into other diseases like cancer. Not all diseases need to be addressed, but dementia and Alzheimer's is a brain disease. And many, many, many years ago, people go, oh, they're getting senile, as like, that's okay. And part of that is truth, in that we do get old, we do get frail, and our brains do shrink. And there's a part of it that's, yes, that's acceptable, but it's not acceptable when it's a disease and it's happening at a clipped rate and it's happening much earlier. And it's just something that we need to address as a disease as well.
No, no, and I think it's just there's a lot of truth in everything that you said, because a lot of this, I mean, it's like one of those things. Like when I was going through it, I didn't talk about it. I
No,
didn't go out there and tell people like, oh man, you know what, it was a struggle. It was like,
because you're hiding it. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want her to be othered. You don't want people to look at you differently, people to look at her differently. And it's
exactly.
hard. And if there is understanding, then maybe we would be a bit more caring society. Because what's happening, you're seeing it now, like with, there's a lot of public attention to like Bruce Willis, who has frontal temporal dementia. And I think that his wife Emma, who has a book out, like, is been trying to raise the curtain here to say, like, he's going through this.
Yeah,
This is not a normal thing. And there's millions of others going through this.
yeah.
And if we hide what we're going through, it's not going to help the people who are out there on the front lines caring for them, and it's not going to help the person. But if we accept who they are and we just adjust, okay, he can't do it this way anymore, but maybe he can do it this way. It's like, I play tennis with my husband still. He's not playing the same game of tennis that he was playing before, but he's still playing, right?
No, no, and I want to backtrack a little bit, because yeah, when I was saying, for me, I didn't talk about like what my mom was going through, and it was personal. I mean, of course, but it was more because for myself, like, she was always the strongest person. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I didn't like seeing her the way she was, and I didn't want anybody else to see her as weak as she was, because it was painful. It was, something that, I mean, we're all getting older, but at the same time, it's like, we don't expect our parents to be, they've always been the stronger ones, the adults. But yeah, it was a tough time, I mean, for the fact that people are out there, talking about this and speaking about this, making movie, documentaries about this. I mean, I think that's great, because yeah, this is something that it will. I saw the screening, so of course I'll thank your PR for sending it to me, and it touched home. It really hit home, and I teared up, because I was like, man, like, you know what, this is like, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that's out there going through this. I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
is something that hundreds, thousands of people are going through. I mean, and yeah, it's like, I mean, we should talk about this, and everybody should know that.
Millions,
Yeah.
millions and millions.
Oh
It's like
yeah.
7 million Americans
Look at that.
right
You see,
now.
and that's like, You know,
It's a lot.
we all do need to make this, raise awareness and let people know up top at the upper level that, this has to be fixed. Something has to be worked, something has to be revised, something has to be changed, and it has to happen now because I mean, there's no reason for everybody else to, many people to keep going through this. But yeah, great film, great
Thank
documentary,
you.
great work, and I appreciate the screening, like I mentioned, and it was one that I'm glad I watched it, and I hope hundreds and thousands of people will watch it as well because it's definitely going to raise eyebrows. You know,
Good. Well, we hope we get it out there for people. Where are your listeners? Are
for the
they
most part here in the U.S., I mean, I do stream out in the UK and the Philippines and South Australia, so I got them all over. So I strategically put them everywhere just so I can keep growing myself, but at the same time, hit as many people as possible. So yes.
good? Well, I hope so. It's a global problem, so let's
No, no,
make
for
sure.
sure. And of course, I mean, when it comes to the film, I mean, we did, this is something, of course, like I mentioned, that hit home because this is something that you yourself and your husband are going through and are still going through. So, for those that are out there struggling or maybe don't uh, have questions but don't know where to get the answers. I mean, what would you say to them?
I think that there's a lot of resources out there that you have to look for a little harder than there are the Alzheimer's associations that are throughout the United States and in, North America, and I know in England and other countries. And that their focus, Alzheimer's Association, a lot on finding a cure, but they're also have, I think what's really important is to find caregiving groups and people that you can connect with. And there's an organization called Caring Across. Seth Rogen and his wife Lauren have one called HFC, which is Hilarity for Charity. There's different caregiving organizations, but I also warn people not to just go online and look at all these Facebook groups of people just complaining about it because that's not sort of helpful. But
Right,
I think it's more about bringing it out there and talking about it openly. And that's why a film or having a book, reading a book and having a discussion about it and putting together groups of people, it's really important that they're open to talk about it. And I think in local, just always starting local, that's always the best way to start. Like I'm in a small town in Vermont, and our library has a connections cafe, what they call it. There's many of them called memory cafes or connections. And we're super different and we're way younger than most of the people in this group. But it's really good that people can come together and meet and talk. And that is something I encourage people to do. And don't take what's really upsetting is out there on television right now, you can see ads for things like Prevagen, memory care, kind of drugs.
brain drug.
And they're not proven, okay?
Right.
They're just selling you shit. And
Yeah.
sorry, I
No,
call it
very
the
cool.
selling of hope. But the idea is that get a second opinion, do the research. You can find out more about it. Really take care of your brain health, eat well, sleep well, and talk to people. Everybody needs to talk to each other and ask for help. I'm not good at this.
I
I
know.
need to ask for more help. We're all afraid. We're all like breeded to be Superman and Superwoman, and I can take care of it all. And you know what? We can't do everything, and that's okay. And that's why I'm saying, like, being in a group and seeing other people with this. I remember somebody invited me to a group and he said, "Yeah, we're going to get together, just the caregivers." And I'm like, "Well, what am I supposed to do? Like, I can't leave my husband at home for
Yeah,
more than an hour. Like, that's not a good idea."
yeah.
Right? So that then became both of us. Like, that turned into caregiver and person. And again, it's like people reaching out on their local, next door, front porch forum, all whatever they have. We need each other. And we need to start talking.
No, no, no. I completely agree. I mean, it's like after we had put my mom in hospice. I mean, she was in that home, and there was times. I mean, 'cause I would go visit her like 2, 3 times a week, or as many times as I could, while I'm not there doing deliveries or working. But one of the things, the people that worked at that facility, I would get there when they'd be talking, or like they wouldn't see me walk in, and I would just kind of wait there a few minutes, till they were done helping her. But always great people, man. Like they took very, very good. I thanked them like after she had passed. I had gone
Yeah,
back after a week and just thanked everybody because I was like, you know what, like I'm glad they were there. I mean, I got
exactly, because
here.
we all need help, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
No,
And
yeah.
that's part
So
of this is like being able to ask for it. And that's why I really think it's so important that we write to our congresspeople and get the Credit for Caring Act passed. It's
I
a
agree.
small drop in the bucket, but it's like we need to ask for help.
No,
And
yeah.
people can't afford help.
No, yeah.
So,
I mean, I agree. Like you said, I mean, a lot of people are afraid to even ask or say or even mention because it's just something that, I mean, it's pride, it's, whatever the case, but it's just hard for a lot of people to ask for help. I mean, I'm
yeah.
myself included. But man, I mean, thank you. I mean, I know we can carry
Thank
on,
you.
and I definitely want to bring you back on here. But
Thank
Heidi,
you.
of course, I thank you, and don't hang up yet. But everybody out there, of course, make sure you listen up, follow up, and of course, Spidey here once again. Till next time, follow up.
And